Welcome to Policy Drivers, the video podcast where we have a chance to talk to leaders in planning and policy who are helping make Texas a better place to live. Today, we have the chance to talk with James Bass. James Bass is the current executive director at Texas Department of Transportation, or TxDOT, as we like to call it. Bass has been with TxDOT for over 30 years, starting back in 1985 in Fort Worth District. He then worked part-time as an engineering aide in Austin's district, South Travis, Hays County area office, and simultaneously was earning his bachelor's in accounting from UT Austin, where all of your fellow interns are currently, and Jay was as well. So in 1999, he was then selected as finance division director and then graduated to chief financial officer and finally achieved the position that he has now as executive director in 2016. So we get a chance to talk to someone who knows a lot about TxDOT and has been involved there for a very long time. So welcome today, James. We would like to give you the space to introduce yourself too and just say hello to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Look forward to the conversation today. And yeah, it was interesting to hear some of my background, which has been longer than I ever expected at TxDOT when I started back in the summer of 1985, but it's been a pleasure for me all of those 30 plus years.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I think a lot of the times we were talking about this earlier this week, especially with our generation, August, Madeline, Tynan, and ours. It's very much like you do something for like 5 years and then you stay in the same kind of space, then you go somewhere else, and so it's really cool and fun to get to talk to someone who's really been in the same space for a career. So we're really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, and it's been interesting on the TxDOT. So as a summer hire, I was an inspector out on our construction projects and did that for a couple summers, then moved into the office environment. And then, as you could see from my bio, spent most of my time in the budget and finance area, which was interesting because not surprisingly, I think that dictates a lot of what TxDOT is able to do and not everybody fully understands this. We may get into it more today. A lot of our funding is dedicated for only certain purposes. Our main funding source is the state highway fund. So it is only allowed to go for the vast majority, for highways, and that provides limitations on what we as the department are then able to provide and offer to the citizens of Texas. And not everybody fully understands that because in different states, they have different funding mechanisms and different policymakers that they may play bigger roles in other modes of transportation. I was going to attempt a very bad joke and say our former CFO used to say, the legislature changed our name back in 1991, and we're just waiting for our funding to catch up. Because in 91, we were the State Department of Highways and Public Transportation, so we got a broader name of Department of Transportation, but our funding mechanism kind of continues to be those legacy funding mechanisms.
Yeah, that's very interesting and cool. Fun that you got to see the name change.
Yeah.
It'll be fun when we see the budget change
and the budget
grow too. That'll also be fun.
Come together, yeah. Jay's waiting for that one.
Yeah.
So to get us started today, something that we always like to talk with our guests about, our policy drivers, is when you were kind of getting started in this space, what is something that you wish someone had told you, and what kind of valuable advice can you offer not only to the interns here today, but also to our listeners who maybe are planning to go into this space in the next near future?
Yeah. So as you were talking about it, I just thought of it. I wish somebody had told me that one day I would be eligible to be the executive director of TxDOT, because that was not the case until 2011. Prior to that, in order to lead the state agency, you were required to be a professional engineer. And I am not that. And the legislature changed that in 2011 to, I guess, broaden the applicant pool, as they say. But one of the things I think is important, and wish I'd known perhaps earlier on, I think it's important to be able to see and understand different points of view. Oftentimes you may come into something and think, well, I'm right, so I don't really care what other people think. That's not generally my approach. But you don't have to agree with everybody's point of view, but I think it's important that you understand their point of view, if that distinction makes sense, to understand what they're coming from, where they're coming from, what's important to them. And I think that'll give you a deeper understanding and a broader understanding of the issue that is at hand. And then I think another thing is to be able to explain your position, why you think a certain way, why you're having to do that. And one of the things I've found over the years that's important is to be able to explain things in different ways, because your first attempt at explaining something may not be successful. And so if you can see that your explanation is not making sense or not making that connection, don't go back and try and repeat the exact same thing a second time.
Right.
Maybe try a different approach and see if you're able to gain a better understanding that way.
Yeah, I think that's, I was just thinking about kind of some of the things that we've all been working together on this summer. And that really is so important, figuring out which approach and which group of people you're talking to, especially in transportation. There are so many, and like all policy spaces, but in so many different viewpoints within the transportation space, and understanding that, okay, actually, maybe these people are not going to respond to the same way. And so I want to say the same thing, but talk to them in a different way that hopefully we can find some common ground. So I think that's some really valuable advice. So during your career at TxDOT, we kind of have been, we were talking earlier with Dr. Carol Lewis about, technology and how things have changed. And so kind of during your career there and your different work in finance, and now you've come up to be executive director, how have you needed to kind of acquire any new skills or adjust and develop some of the current skills that you have now?
So when I became finance director in 1999, the Department of Transportation had borrowed exactly $0 before. So we had never had any bonding or borrowing programs. And many would argue that this is not necessarily a good thing, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but since that time, we've now issued over $20 billion in bonding programs. The legislature provided us 3 different borrowing programs with different revenues backing those bonds over time. And then also we've issued bonds for different toll road systems. One of those bonding programs is the Texas Mobility Fund, and I would say that it's kind of an exception to what I was talking about before, that so much of our money is limited and restricted to just highways, and that's very true for the State Highway Fund, which is our dominant revenue source. But the Texas Mobility Fund is broader. It can basically be used for highways and other public transportation projects. And that's the other thing too. As you go through this, when I say other public transportation, everybody, well, maybe says, oh yeah, I know what that means. But then when you're in the weeds of it on a day-to-day basis, it gets into the details. It's like, well, what about a rail project? Is that public transportation? And does that mean publicly owned, or does it mean supposed to be serving the public? And generally what's happened through discussions with lawmakers in the Attorney General's office, we have a general sense that public transportation does not mean freight rail, but it would mean commuter rail if its primary purpose is to move people. Sorry, that's my dog. I don't know if you can hear that or not. Sorry. If the primary purpose is to move people, then it's eligible. But if it's to move freight or goods, then it's not. So port projects, not really eligible, but if it's a road providing access to the ports, then it is. So sorry, I took that tangent. The other thing is I kind of talked about it on the first one, and it's part of communication, but I'd also say translation is a key skill that I think I've been able to pick up. So, engineers are not always known for being the best communicators, nor are people with accounting degrees. But, I've spent enough time within the department, and I know the issues we're dealing with. And sometimes I'm able to hear that internal voice and what the issue and concern is, and then be able to help them share it externally. Because you do have sometimes very technical subject matter experts that, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and their strengths may be, they're a superstar on a technical level, but they may struggle sometimes communicating, and being able to help them, navigate that and move through it is another skill that I think has been important and that I've acquired over the years. At least I hope I have.
I think that's particularly great because I know for me, with my sort of humanities and communications background and getting into other technical fields, there is, like, every discipline has some really specified language that serves useful purposes within that discipline, but when they try and use that to talk to someone else, then people end up frequently working with two different definitions of the words, and they end up talking past each other instead of reaching the same conclusion, which can be very difficult. So I really appreciate that you emphasize that. Because it's really hard to get stuff done if everybody's talking past each other.
Well, and sometimes you remind me, sometimes just being in meetings and observing two other people talking, you're able to understand the question, and the person that responding they may be talking past each other. And it reminds me of oftentimes as humans, we listen to a question in order to respond, rather than we listen to a question in order to understand. So we're already thinking about our response rather than kind of sitting back and listening to try and understand what it is, the other person's trying to bring up. And so sometimes even being, in the room but not part of the primary conversation, you can kind of step in and say, I'm not really sure that's what they were asking. If I phrase it this way, is that what you were at? And they're like, yeah, that's what I was asking. And then you can kind of help bridge that gap maybe.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that is especially important as we're moving into this space where a lot of things are online, and it's really easy to kind of talk over each other. And you can mute people, obviously, but you don't want to mute them so that they can't speak. So I think it's especially now a good thing to really pay attention to, is not just listening to someone so that you can get your point across and respond. So I think that's something that we're definitely seeing need to be changed a little bit. So
yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit before, and I kind of wanted to follow up and ask you a little bit more about it. You spoke earlier about how there is transit and funding that can really only be spent on certain things, and that tends to be something that maybe the general public doesn't necessarily understand. And so I kind of was wondering, what are some more things, or maybe you want to expand on that people who are either involved in the transportation world or want to be better involved, maybe they don't understand and wish that they kind of better understood to work with you?
Yeah, and I think one of those things would probably be, the people at TxDOT, I think are, big surprise. I think they're all great. One of the issues is we are not an autonomous being. We don't get to make all of our decisions. And even, I do not consider myself and my position a policy maker. And that may or may not sound strange to you, but I would say, yeah, it's probably a policy advisor, because at TxDOT, we have a commission, and they're a policy board that oversees the work of TxDOT. And obviously we get policy direction from the legislature and the governor. And in different states, that may be different. In different states, rather than executive director of TxDOT, might a peer of mine in another state may be transportation commissioner, where they're appointed by the governor, and they are more of a policymaker than my position. And even within state government in Texas, you have some agencies that are led by an individual commissioner, so no board. They are their board and their executive director. And then you have other agencies where you have a policy board and kind of a day-to-day manager, if you will. And so, we are limited by our funding mechanisms as well and what we're asked to work on by the policymakers. And so we work on those things. And I think maybe it's just human nature. People think, oh, well, TxDOT is doing this, TxDOT, why are they doing this? Why are you doing it? Well, because that's the direction we've been given. And so if there is, if people have a concern over that direction, I'm happy to have that conversation, right, to kind of understand the issue and the concern. But I would also encourage people to talk to their members, of the legislature, because that's really what's going to, if there is going to be a change, if we feel like there needs to be a change, that's really, I would say, kind of the starting point of helping encourage that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could all be a bit more involved for sure, and especially in the state of Texas where it's so big and there's so much to do.
Yeah.
So I am curious, and I think we're all curious to know what you believe are some of your personal accomplishments and successes within this area, kind of in the past, even in the present, and maybe if there's some future projects that you're currently working on or supporting.
And so it may sound silly, but I'm very happy that recently we just changed our mission statement at TxDOT. We went to our commission, and our commission agreed, and we changed our mission statement. So previously, our mission statement was, through collaboration and leadership, we deliver a safe, reliable, and integrated transportation system that enables the movement of people and goods. Just rolls right off the tongue.
Perfect.
And I'd heard a story, and I don't know if it's true, but that, JFK back in the early 60s was touring NASA and going through, and he saw a gentleman over, on the side, kind of cleaning up or sweeping up, and he went over and said, "Hey, I'm John F. Kennedy. What is it that you do here?" And he said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." And so in that cult, everybody was bought in to the mission, right? Everybody knew why they were there and what they were doing. And so we moved away from through collaboration and leadership, blah, blah, blah. And I'm hoping that, people at TxDOT, well, what do you do? Well, we connect you with Texas. And so our mission statement is now connecting you with Texas. And we like that because we're able to add on at the end of it, if we want, connecting you with Texas safely, connecting you with Texas education, connecting you with Texas job opportunities, connecting you with Texas family and entertainment, and on and on. So, and we were thinking, connecting you to what matters most, but I think other people have already used that one. So we changed it. And I think it simplifies it, and I hope it really drives home to people what we're, why we do what we do. And one of the things we're currently working on is trying to ingrain that within the TxDOT culture that, transportation is about people. It's not about roads and bridges or whatever. It's about people and their daily lives. And even on some of our websites and some of our documents that we put out, if you look through them, a lot of times you'll see lonely highways or, very congested roadways, and like, no, it's about the people. Where are those people going? What are we enabling and helping people to get to that matters to them? It's more so about them. And then also a renewed focus on safety. So each year in October, or normal year, not this year, we have a gathering of kind of TxDOT leadership. And I have an opportunity on Tuesday to kind of give a state of the department, if you would, speech. And a few years ago, my speech was on safety because I I felt like, and I was afraid that we were saying, oh, safety is job one at TxDOT, safety is job one. So we were definitely talking the talk, but I felt like it had lost some of its energy. And I get that because human nature, just seeing year after year the fatalities, continue to grow, and you've tried certain things and certain things aren't happening. They don't seem to be successful. I could see that people would kind of lose some of that energy. And so I think it was an Acura commercial that I showed. And there's a gentleman, and he's putting mannequins into a vehicle, and he first puts in a young girl, and then a young boy, and then an adult woman. He puts in a mannequin in the driver's seat, and when he backs away, you can see that the mannequin in the driver's seat is him. And he goes to do a crash test, so he goes in the booth and hits the button, and the camera jumps back into the cab of the vehicle, and you can see, no, they're really crash test dummies. They're not these mannequins that he had in his mind. And I think the tagline is something like, it's amazing what we can do when we don't think of them as dummies. And so, when you don't think about the fatalities and the statistics as just a number, you think of them as people, and maybe some of your loved ones. It can kind of change that thinking, like, no, it is important. And so that's one thing that I'm happy that we've done. And our commission, as you may know, adopted a Vision Zero goal of 2050 of zero fatalities, because that that has to be the goal. That's the goal of everyone. And then another thing, I can't remember if it was the very next year, but kind of talked about diversity and inclusion at TxDOT, which over the years has not always been known for being the most diverse and inclusive organization, and that's something I would really like to see change. And so we talked about that in this annual meeting speech. And then I guess about a year and a half ago, we started a diversity and inclusion section within the department. And there may be other state agencies that have done that. I'm sure there are. I don't think there are many, but so I think we're one of the first, and they've been doing, a great job. And of course, with the current social unrest, I've had opportunities to make videos and send them out to our employees. And one of the things, and I'd read this somewhere, but I shared it with our group, because for whatever reason, if you say Black Lives Matter, you get, some people you're going to get a reaction from. And so I asked people to just consider, last year when there were shootings in El Paso, and El Paso came out with El Paso Strong, I don't remember anybody going, well, what about Austin? We're strong too. Or, Abilene, we're pretty strong, so why are you just saying Abilene? No, a segment of our community was hurting and in pain, and people adopted that saying in order to show support. And I would equate that to Black Lives Matter, right? That segment of our community is experiencing pain and suffering, and so to show support for them, you would say Black Lives Matter. And the other example somebody used was when somebody says, Breast Cancer Awareness Week. Nobody responds with, well, what about prostate cancer? What about? No, it's focused on that one issue, right? And it's not an either or, debate. It's just the focus on that segment. And so I think we're, changing the culture, if you will, within TxDOT, and that's not something you can just snap your fingers right overnight and make it happen. But and it's the positive response has been great to see within the department. So
yeah, I think that's really important, and I think especially in Texas, being able to make those kind of analogies that might make more sense to some other people is really, really important. And I know that Jay has also been, this summer, we've all been trying to see what we can do kind of within the transportation space, because there are a lot of communities that are not getting the resources that they need. And within that, we've kind of been trying to address that within Vision Zero. And so you kind of like touched on this just briefly, how you all had just adopted this, which is great. And we're really excited to be working with TxDOT and just Texas in general and all the cities and counties and MPOs. So I'm just curious, like, how are things progressing so far towards the Vision Zero goal?
So we were happy that for the past couple of years, the fatalities had been on a decline. And surprisingly, perhaps that's not happening this year. People would have thought that, you know, with the pandemic and everybody teleworking, or not everybody, but a lot of people teleworking, that we would have seen a big drop off. And we've seen a drop off in traffic volumes, but we haven't seen a drop off in fatalities. So I don't know if it's people are seeing an open road and so they're just driving faster or whatever. But in addition to announcing the goal, our commission committed $600 million, and that was $300 million in year one and $300 million in year two, to go for focused, you know, safety improvements on the on our transportation network. And so what we've done is kind of broadly focus that $600 million for the issue of roadway lane departure, pedestrian safety, because we have, even with the overall decrease in fatalities, even the last few years, we've seen an increase in pedestrian fatalities. And then a focus on intersection safety, and then also technology, because I think technology is going to be a big help in allowing us to reach the Vision Zero goal. One of the challenges, I think, and, you know, that's one of the great things, society is always changing, but one of the challenges, and it's not that new for an old guy like me, it seems new, but probably not for the people I'm talking with, but for, you know, smartphones. So it's a possible new distraction within the vehicle. I also think it's a possible distraction for pedestrians and, you know, walkers, joggers, bicyclists, or whatever, and especially if you have headphones in, which I know I do when I go out walking, right? And well, it may muffle some of the sound noise, but so you potentially have a distracted driver and a distracted pedestrian. So that's a challenge, but I think some technology issues can help us with that. The other thing, you know, we talk about the 3 E's of safety, and that's engineering, education, and enforcement. And so we also have some driver education programs. Everybody's probably familiar with, you know, Click It or Ticket, that we work with the Department of Public Safety and law enforcement on. But we have, you know, Don't Drink and Drive, different things. And so I think this year our commission has approved around just over 350 different grants for over 84 million that are dealing with drunk driving deterrence, pedestrian safety, motorcycle safety, distracted driving that we talked about, seatbelt usage. So we're always working, you know, with all of our partners to try and accelerate on the road to Vision Zero, so we can get there as soon as we can. The other thing is our team on the engineering side, they are developing, working with A&M, their Texas Transportation Institute, kind of a safety scoring tool of looking at a planned project and giving it a safety score. And then we're able to share that and maybe go back to the district and go, look, we're going in to do an improvement. And generally speaking, every time we do an improvement, it helps safety, but there may be other safety elements near the roadway or elsewhere that if we're in there doing work, let's go ahead and enhance all that we can at the time and make it, you know, as safe as possible. unfortunately, today it's a risk when we get in a vehicle. Maybe with autonomous vehicles someday it won't be as risky, but today it is. So I'm not saying that we're ever going to have a 100% safe road, because you're going to always have that human interaction with the roadway and with the broader transportation network. But let's do everything we can within reason, and if we're in an area, let's go ahead and make those improvements today.
And I think a small one that I saw the other day on a street near me, I think this is the city, but I usually bike to class. And I went out yesterday and saw that they had repainted the bike lanes on a road where they had faded. And not only could you actually see that they were there, but they were twice as wide as before. So the bike lane wasn't just the gutter at the edge of the road, and there was like an extra line so that there was a clear division between where I could ride my bike and where the cars were. And so I'm very excited about that, because that intersection before, I had to figure out a way to merge with car traffic in the middle of an intersection or hit the curb. And that wasn't a great feeling. So just like seeing a bit of paint on the road yesterday made me really excited.
Yeah.
The little things these days.
Yep.
So I had a question that's related, but it's a bit different. In that ADA is like a federally unfunded mandate. So this was, the 30-year anniversary of ADA. I was wondering if you could talk about what the next steps are for TxDOT to continue improving and bringing TxDOT facilities up to compliance with the ADA.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We participated in a number of online meetings the last couple of weeks, along with the governor's office and other state agencies on the 30th anniversary. And this may sound odd, or at least it did to me initially. So one of the things we're doing is we're working on a comprehensive update to our ADA transition plan. And the thing that struck me perhaps as a little odd is transition plan. I'm like, wait, it was adopted 30 years ago. So why is there a transition? Why are we not already there? And I think there's just so much to do. And so one of the elements of it is we're, obviously we want to serve all populations of Texas, and we hope to have that updated transition plan next fiscal year in 2021. One of the things, after the call I was on last week, so we currently have a new campus under construction kind of over in East Austin. And I know that we've had, ADA experts as part of the design, and, it's all within specifications and requirements. But what I asked the team to do is like, okay, I know we've done that, but let's bring in some people, some stakeholders representing the community, and say, what issues do you run into? So something may be within ADA specifications, but there still may be a challenge. And so let's talk to people who deal with these issues on a daily basis and have them review our plans to see, hey, it would be a lot easier for me to maneuver if you did X, Y, Z, because just construction hasn't started. They're still, kind of doing the dirt work and everything else. And so now's the best time to know that. The other thing more broadly, though, that this transition plan, we're not really just looking at it as a report. We really want it to be a comprehensive, livable system of information that allows for proper planning and execution for remediation and construction over time, working with others on transportation needs and transportation planning needs. And so it's going to go into collecting data, like 100% of our public rights of way would be included in there. And so we'll have a complete inventory of ramps, sidewalks, transit stops, actual measurements. No other DOT that we're aware of has will have anything, close to what we're talking about here. Policy updates to include, this is more internal inclusivity within our districts and divisions. We're also going to have a GIS web-based application that it's currently under development, but purposes it will allow users within TxDOT to access information for planning and accessibility. And one of the things I've asked the team to start looking at, so there's a challenge, and maybe I should have said this too. So my understanding in state statute, sorry, this is somewhat related to ADA, I'll bring it back, but you reminded me of something else. So, in state statute, it says, obviously, we're responsible for the state highway system. Well, not everybody knows what the state highway system is. I do, but people may or may not know. And then the law also says that cities are responsible for all public roadways within their jurisdiction. Well, wait, state highway system is a public roadway. So does that mean, once we enter into Austin, that Austin's now responsible for the state highway system and we're outside of it? And that would just be confusing. So we've worked with cities, and generally speaking, if they have more than 50,000 population, they do the traffic signals, even if it's on our system, because it really needs to integrate with the local street system, right? And so you don't want different things than that. And generally speaking, sidewalks are a local responsibility, if you will, and haven't historically been looked at as a TxDOT responsibility when you get into the cities. Now, we're looking at that saying, well, no, we need to provide access and for people who may have mobility challenges, and being able to sit down with some members of ADAPT and hear some of their stories about just simply trying to get to the doctor's office, and there not being a sidewalk for them to get there, so they're forced to drive in the street. They may be on a motorized scooter and there's no place for them to go other than the street, and then they're interacting with vehicles, much larger vehicles driving at much higher speeds, which is just not safe. And so we're now looking to do more. And I want to be clear, none of my statement wasn't to say it was 100% cities and not ours at all, but it's kind of this strange mix of responsibilities. And I'm asking our team, no, we just need to step up and do what's right and make sure we're providing access to everybody on our system.
Can I just jump in that the act you're saying of doing the inventory is such a good big deal, and that even just the city of Houston and city of Austin have estimated their sort of missing sidewalks is a $2 billion problem in each city at least. And so at least having TxDOT at least helping everyone understand the issue could really help. So sorry to jump in.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, and we're looking forward to that update. And again, it struck me as odd as transition, but I think there's even 30 years later, there's still work to be done, and it may be a situation where there's always going to be additional challenges as our cities and our living and working environments continue to evolve. There's likely always going to be new challenges to be addressed.
Okay, sorry, we're all trying to figure out who's asking the next question. So I think we've heard a lot today kind of about maybe some things that, the public maybe doesn't know, or the inner workings of TxDOT, which has been really interesting. And so from your perspective and your vantage point, what do you think and what have you experienced as the biggest changes within transportation policy at your time in TxDOT?
So I don't know if it's so much policy. I think some of it is, but it kind of goes back to the smartphone, right? So with the smartphone, you have ride sharing, you got the scooters, you also have distraction or the potential for distraction and everything else. And so those have all created their own unique challenges and opportunities, right? And so that's been a large one. I do think it's interesting. It will be interesting going forward. So if you look, the projection is that Texas is going to almost double, right? Not quite, but almost double in the next 20 to 30 years. And so transportation is going to have to change, right? The single occupant vehicle, whatever, is not going to be able to maneuver. There's no way we could build enough with current technology and vehicles to handle all of that. So technology is either going to have to help us do that. And the other thing I'm happy is, and our mission didn't say it before, we don't talk about moving vehicles, we talk about moving people, right? And so the job is not to move a vehicle, it's to move people. And if people choose to be in a vehicle or a bus or even a larger vehicle, hey, that's great. We just need to help that, assist that movement. And so I think it's going to be, in coming years, it's going to be a challenge of how does this growth not choke itself, if that makes sense, right? Just because it gets so clogged and congested, and having different alternatives for people to get where they need to go, whether that's work or entertainment or family events, that they have options to get there. Is kind of a new challenge. And if the other challenge / opportunity is going to be the integration of connected and autonomous vehicles. And some of the questions are, in order for that to work, are those vehicles going to need the transportation system to communicate with them, or are the vehicles just going to be able to communicate amongst themselves and they don't really need to hear from the system itself? I think the current thought is, well, no, it would be better if the infrastructure could communicate with the vehicles back and forth, and vehicles with vehicles. You'll get more communication and it would be better integrated and more efficient. But obviously that hasn't been determined yet. I don't know how far off into the future that is or how close it is in the future, but that's something that we have a group that is very focused on, that what challenges and what opportunities are going to present themselves as a society. We kind of move closer to potentially to connected and autonomous vehicles.
We wanted to ask one more question if you have time.
Sure.
Do you have time? Okay. So with any discipline, there's a balance between policies and practical limitations of implementation of those policies. So in transportation, that balance looks like policymakers and transportation, like traffic engineers, making those decisions together. To what extent, in your experience, is policy dictating the engineering, or are policies more likely to come from engineering principles and best practices? And we won't share this with the engineers if you want to be honest.
So, no, I think actually it's a balance. It's a great question. And sometimes it depends upon the specificity of that policy, right? Sometimes the policy can be so specific that there's not a lot of wiggle room or leeway, right? It's like, this is it. And it's like, all right, there's only one way to deliver this. Other times it's more broad. And I think in the majority of cases, it's broader. It's majority of cases, it's less specific. And so in those cases, I would say that the engineering takes over and looks at, how to best accomplish the goal of that policy without being, overly prescribed by the policymakers. So I think that's the majority of cases where our subject matter experts are able to kind of engage with that policy and then try and figure out the best way to implement it, rather than policymakers saying, here is the policy and here's how you will implement it.
I was just thinking of, an engineering solution to cars not hitting each other would be make the lanes huge, which doesn't seem to make sense from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, that would be more expensive, and then you're going to need more right of way. So now you're taking more private property. And then the other thing is there's, the concept of a road diet, right? So the broader and the wider the lane gets, am I now more comfortable to drive faster because I have this perception of safety, which may or may not be real? And if the lanes are more narrow, well, I may feel a little restricted, so maybe I'm going to be more aware and more in tune with what I'm doing and driving, and I may not drive as fast as I otherwise would. And what's the appropriate balance, right? Is it a 24-foot lane or is it a 12-foot lane, or what, and what speeds should certain roadways be designed and allowed? And of course, that's where the enforcement comes in, right, for driver safety. But yeah, trying to find that balance of making it safe. But there's a school of thought, if you make it so safe, then people are just going to drive faster than perhaps they should, and put themselves and others at risk. And I think Jay may have is it a 30-foot chicken philosophy, or what's the what's the saying there, Jay? Okay.
Yeah, the 15-foot chicken. But yeah, if there are interesting things on the side of the road, and especially people, that if there are people to look at, everybody drives a little slower. But or if it's art, and even the city of Houston's done they paint the little utility boxes at the intersections with little tiny murals, and that actually has an impact. And like, you have something interesting to look at, you'll drive safer.
And I think we at TxDOT allow them, because a lot of those utility boxes are ours. But I remember having a conversation 2 or 3 years ago, and we had piloted it somewhere. And anyway, we had a discussion and said, yeah, we'll let that happen. And yeah, good. To your point, it kind of, hopefully it helps, beautify the environment too. There's certain things we need to have to help the system operate, but if it can look nicer, that works too.
Can I throw in a quick thing following up on the sort of talking about speed and design, and just that the Texas Roadway Design Manual is being updated, and so and I, like all processes, I shouldn't be happy completely with it, and I hope that no one's happy completely. I hope it works with everybody, but just, is there anything you want to say about where you hope that's going?
So we are working on an update, and it's going to synchronize. There's a national organization of state DOTs that's called AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and they develop a green book that then states kind of use as a model going forward. So we're going to try and synchronize with that. Bring in new standards, address new materials and classifications, but potential changes we're looking at right now is like a new bicycle accommodations chapter, standalone pedestrian elements chapter, additional context classification for context sensitive solutions, and expansion of the alternative intersections and interchanges reflecting updated research results on that. Updated roadside safety guidance, again, looking at, coming from this AASHTO organization, roadside design guide. New safety analysis and traffic operations guidance. So I think it's going to broaden and maybe not be as much of and not saying the current one is a cookie cutter approach, but, really you need to look at the situation you're in. And again, that context sensitive, be sensitive to where the roadway is going to be and have it fit in with not only with the broader environment, but by that I mean also with the community that's going to be living around that infrastructure, not just for the people driving through on a particular roadway, but the people that are living near and around that infrastructure as well.
Well, that's great.
Well, awesome. This has been really awesome and exciting for us. I'm glad that you were able to take the time today to have this discussion. And I think there's been some really awesome takeaways that we can kind of move forward and have our listeners get more excited about where the future of transportation and Vision Zero and all these wonderful initiatives are going. So I just want to thank you, James, for having this discussion with us today. And for all you policy drivers out there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome videos with local policymakers and policy drivers in Texas. Thanks, James.
Thank y'all.
so much.
I appreciate it.